Why Dale Cooper talked to a tape recorder named Diane. A small click. A soft hum of tape. A man in a dark suit alone in a hotel room, speaking a woman's name into empty air. For 2 full seasons on ABC, millions of viewers watched an FBI agent named Dale Cooper have the most intimate relationship of his life with a woman who never walked on screen. She never answered him. She never appeared in a single frame. Viewers assumed she was his secretary. Some assumed his lover. Some assumed she was imaginary. The truth was stranger than any of that. Diane was never really about Diane at all. If you were watching television in the spring of 1990, you probably remember the recorder before you remember the case. A small black cassette machine, held in one hand, the tape rolling, while the other hand held a cup of black coffee. Cooper would click it on, greet Diane like she was in the next chair, and describe everything. The pie he was eating, the dream he had, the trees outside the window, a murder investigation dictated with the calm of a man reading a letter to a friend. Most viewers assumed the recorder was written into the pilot as a quirky detail, a piece of costume for a strange new detective. It was not. In interviews and DVD commentaries over the years, both David Lynch and Kyle MacLachlan have described the object as something that emerged during production, rather than something planned. Lynch himself was known for dictating notes and ideas into small recorders throughout his own career. He carried them everywhere. When MacLachlan and Lynch began shaping Cooper's on-screen behavior, the recorder became part of it almost by instinct. That small choice ended up doing an enormous amount of work. MacLachlan built Cooper's inner life around that object. Every scene where the recorder came out became a stage of its own, a private theater where the character could speak thoughts. A network drama would normally never let a lead character say out loud. Viewers thought they were watching a quirk. They were actually watching a storytelling device that made the entire show possible. And if that recorder was Cooper's mind, then the name he kept speaking into it mattered more than anyone realized. Diane. Listen to the way Cooper said it. Polite, warm, slightly formal. The tone of a man addressing someone he genuinely knew. Someone he trusted. Someone with an actual chair and an actual desk, somewhere at the other end of the line. There was nothing mystical in his voice. Nothing haunted. He said the name the way a colleague says a colleague's name across an office. In the original conception, that is exactly what Diane was supposed to be. Cooper's transcriptionist at the FBI, a woman doing a very ordinary job, somewhere in a very ordinary building back in the world outside Twin Peaks. She had files, she had a typewriter, she had headphones, she was practical, she was real, she was, on paper, the least mysterious thing in the entire series. And that is the strangest part. A functional secretary somehow became one of the most talked about invisible characters in television history. She was written as ordinary. The audience made her mythic. The gap between what the writers put in the script and what viewers built in their heads is where Twin Peaks began quietly doing something no other network show was doing in 1990. To understand why this mattered, you have to remember what network television was in that year. ABC Thursdays. Primetime slots fought over by executives. TV guide listings sitting on coffee tables across the country. A landscape thick with cop procedurals, laugh-track sitcoms, and prestige dramas that all followed strict, well-tested formulas. Networks knew what worked. They knew what advertisers wanted, and they knew what they did not want. They did not want interior monologue. Voiceover was considered risky. It slowed pacing. It confused sponsors. It broke the classic show-don't-tell rule that network standards had drilled into writers for decades. A leading man was supposed to reveal his thoughts through his face, his actions, his dialogue with other characters, not through a private confession to the audience. Lynch and Frost had a problem. They wanted Cooper to have a huge, strange, dreamlike inner voice. They wanted viewers inside his head. They wanted him to describe details the camera could never quite capture. But they were making a show on ABC in a Thursday night slot with advertisers watching every minute, so they gave him a recorder. And they gave the recorder a name. That was the workaround. On the page and on screen, Cooper was not delivering voiceover. He was dictating to an off-screen employee, a perfectly reasonable, believable workplace action. Nothing experimental, nothing avant-garde, just a detective doing his paperwork, the way any detective might. What looked like a charming quirk was actually a Trojan horse. It was a way to smuggle literary interiority onto commercial television. It let the show whisper directly into the viewer's ear while pretending, on the surface, that nothing unusual was happening. The network never had to approve a voiceover format. Diane was the cover, and the actor holding that cover in his hand was doing more work than most viewers ever realized. Kyle MacLachlan, in his sharp dark suit and neatly parted hair, became one of the most photographed faces of 1990. Rolling Stone put him on the cover. TV Guide leaned into his image. Promotional stills of him raising that coffee cup toward camera showed up in magazines everywhere. But the truth about those recorder scenes was quieter than the promotional gloss. MacLachlan has said, in interviews and later commentary tracks, that many of the Diane monologues were only lightly scripted. In some cases, he was given a moment, a location, a mood, and asked to fill it. What sounded like carefully written character writing was often an actor alone on a set, inventing warmth for a woman who did not exist. Think about what that means for a second. The most tender scenes in Twin Peaks were not between two actors. They were between one actor and an empty room. MacLachlan was building an entire relationship with silence. He was doing the work most actors do with a scene partner, but with no partner in the frame, no eyeline to lock onto, no reaction to bounce off of, just a small piece of plastic in his hand, and a name to say into it. That kind of performance is much harder than it looks. On a soundstage full of crew members and camera operators and lighting technicians, an actor has to conjure a private, intimate moment as if the room were empty. MacLachlan has described the Cooper role, in various interviews, as one of the most personally connected performances of his career. Some of that connection lived inside those recorder scenes. He gave Diane a personality without ever meeting her. He gave her preferences, memories, private jokes. He decided what she would want to know and what she would smile at, and the silence was working. Somewhere between the improvisation on set and the broadcast on Thursday nights, something strange began happening in living rooms across the country. Viewers started writing letters to Diane. Early 1990s fan culture was a physical thing. Handwritten letters sent to network offices, VHS tapes traded through the mail, Twin Peaks fan clubs meeting in libraries and living rooms, tie-in books like the Access Guide to the Town of Twin Peaks sitting on bedside tables, magazine cover stories analyzing every frame, convention panels running long into the night, and in the middle of all of it, a growing quiet obsession with a woman who had never once appeared on screen. Fans wrote fiction about Diane. They debated her age, her hair color, her office layout. Some were sure she was Cooper's ex-wife. Some were sure she was a former partner who had died in the field. Some were sure she was simply the audience projected into the frame. The production team was aware of the theories. They were amused by them. They also, wisely, refused to answer them. There was even a spin-off tie-in released in 1990, a novelty audio cassette called Diane, credited as the Twin Peaks tapes of Agent Cooper, featuring MacLachlan reading recorder monologues over a running length of about an hour. Fans bought it, played it in their cars, played it in their kitchens, played it on Walkmans, a commercial audio cassette sold in stores of a man talking to a woman who was never in the room. That is the kind of gravitational pull she had, even without a face, because the show had created something rare on network television, a character defined entirely by absence, whose meaning belonged more to the viewers than to the writers. Twin Peaks is remembered as the show that asked who killed Laura Palmer, but there was a second question running underneath it, quieter, more personal, and never spoken out loud on the air. Who is Diane? And that question, the show refused to answer for 27 years. Then the trouble began. By late 1990 and into 1991, Twin Peaks was in serious ratings trouble. ABC had pushed the writers to reveal Laura Palmer's killer sooner than Lynch and Frost wanted. That reveal came, and with it, the audience began drifting away. The mystery that had held viewers together started to loosen. Time slots shifted. Weeks went by without new episodes. The strange, patient rhythm the show relied on was broken by the schedule itself. By June of 1991, the finale aired to an audience that was shocked, confused, and, in many cases, gone. ABC canceled the show soon after. Dozens of story threads went cold. Cooper's fate, Annie, the Black Lodge, Wyndham Earle, and Diane. Still just a voice, still just a name, still never seen. The cancellation itself has become part of classic television folklore. Twin Peaks had opened as one of the most talked about network premieres of the decade. Rolling Stone covers, TV Guide features, newspaper columns arguing about what it all meant. And then, in barely more than a year, it was gone from primetime, filed away with the other beautiful failures the networks had grown tired of. The 1992 prequel film, Fire Walk With Me, arrived in theaters and split audiences and critics down the middle. For most viewers, that seemed to be the end of the story. For years, that unanswered question sat inside the show's legacy like a light left on in an empty room. Fans traded theories on early internet forums, in fanzines like Wrapped in Plastic, at conventions, in dorm rooms watching worn-out VHS copies of the pilot. Bootleg tapes circulated, homemade transcripts of every recorder scene got passed around. New viewers discovered the show in college dorm marathons and asked the same question the old fans were asking. The show was gone, but Diane was still there, at the other end of the tape, waiting. The strange truth is that the cancellation did not kill the mystery, it preserved it. Diane became more powerful because the show ended before it could ruin her. If Twin Peaks had continued a third season, she might have appeared eventually, and any appearance would have carried the weight of every fan's imagination. Any casting choice would have disappointed someone. The show ending when it did wrapped a soft glass case around her. She stayed exactly the shape each viewer had built for her, no bigger and no smaller. And so she stayed there, for a quarter century, on old VHS tapes, on DVD box sets, on late-night cable reruns, on dorm room rewatches, on grainy YouTube clips that started appearing in the early 2000s. A woman made entirely of a voice speaking to her, of a name repeated softly across 2 seasons of network television, of the imagination of everyone who ever leaned closer to the screen when Cooper clicked the recorder on. Which is exactly why, when Lynch was offered the chance to bring Twin Peaks back in 2017, he had to face a decision he had been avoiding for 27 years. Whether Diane would finally walk into the room. The revival landed on Showtime in the spring of 2017. The cast was older. Cooper was older. The town felt like a room that had been closed off since 1991 and finally unlocked. Fans who had been teenagers when the original aired were now in their 40s. Some had introduced their own children to the show. Some had watched the original tape so many times that they knew every line of dialogue and every note of the theme song by memory. And when the new season began, one question sat heavier than any other. Would she be there? She was. Lynch cast Laura Dern as Diane. That choice was not casual. Dern had worked with Lynch since Blue Velvet in the mid-1980s and Wild at Heart at the start of the 1990s. She carried a shared history no unknown actress could have brought. She had edge. She had damage. She had a face that looked like it had been through things. Casting her was less like introducing a new character than like unlocking a door that had been closed since 1991. For older fans who had imagined Diane for 27 years, seeing her walk into a scene was an emotional event. Some loved it instantly. Some felt a small private thing had been taken away from them. Both reactions were understandable. The Diane in their heads had been their own for a very long time. Now she belonged to the screen. That is a very particular kind of loss, and only long-term fans of a show can really feel it. The invisible character had been a personal possession. The moment she became visible, she stopped being that, but the revelation did not cheapen the mystery. It confirmed something viewers had always sensed. Diane was never just a name. She was the show's memory of something wounded, something that had happened long before the story started, something Cooper carried around with him in that little recorder like a locket. The way Dern played her, in the revival, made the earlier voiceovers land differently. When you go back and watch the original series now, the recorder scenes feel heavier. There is grief in them that was not obvious the first time around, which brings the whole story back to a question the recorder had been quietly asking from the very first episode. Why did Cooper keep talking into it at all? Watch him, alone in a hotel room at the Great Northern, wood paneling on the walls, coffee in a cup nearby. The recorder in his hand. He clicks it on. He greets Diane by name. He describes the day. He notes small details. He wishes her well. He clicks the recorder off. David Lynch has spoken often, across many interviews and over many decades, about loneliness. It runs through nearly all of his work. The quiet ache underneath even his warmest characters. The sense that people are always reaching towards something they cannot quite touch. The recorder was not a plot device. It was, in a very real sense, a way to show a man reaching out into the dark and trusting that someone was listening. Now think about the viewer, sitting in a wood-paneled living room in 1990 in front of a heavy console television, maybe with a VHS tape recording every episode for later. The house quiet, the family half watching or fully absorbed. Cooper clicks the recorder on. He starts to speak, and the viewer, on some level, understands exactly what he is doing, because they are doing the same thing. Sitting alone with a television, hoping the story on screen is talking back to them. Diane was not Cooper's secretary. Diane was the audience. Once you hear it that way, you cannot unhear it. Every recorder scene in the original series changes. Every warm little detail Cooper describes into the tape becomes something he is sharing directly with the person watching. The politeness, the trust, the tenderness, the habit of noticing beautiful small things and telling someone about them. All of it, aimed at a woman who was never in the room, because the woman was always on the other side of the screen. Twin Peaks lasted less than 2 full seasons on ABC. The network moved on. The cast scattered into other projects. The sound stages were dismantled. The wardrobe went into storage. Kyle MacLachlan took on other roles, some of them warm, some of them strange, none of them quite like Cooper. David Lynch made other films, some celebrated, some argued about, some almost impossible to describe. The town of Twin Peaks became a memory, then a rerun, then a DVD box set, then a streaming title, then a revival, then a memory again. For older fans who watched the show in its original run, the whole shape of that history is bittersweet. The wood-paneled living rooms where they first heard Cooper's voice have mostly been renovated or sold. The heavy console televisions are gone. The VHS tapes are stacked in closets or thrown away. The magazines are packed in boxes. Some of the actors are no longer with us. David Lynch himself passed away in early 2025, and the news landed heavy for the generation that grew up hearing his fingerprints in every Cooper scene. But the recorder outlived all of it, and so did the woman who was not there. You can still find the show now, on late-night reruns and streaming services, and old worn tapes in boxes and attics. And if you play one of those old episodes, the sound is exactly the same as it was 35 years ago. A small click, a soft hum, a voice in a hotel room, alone, saying a name into empty air. The reason that voice still stays with people, all these years later, is not really about what Cooper said. It is about who he trusted to hear it. He trusted Diane. And Diane, in the end, was every viewer who ever leaned a little closer to the television, wanting to be part of the story. Somewhere in a living room right now, someone is watching an old episode for the first time. The recorder clicks on. Cooper begins to speak. And on the other side of the screen, quietly, without saying a word, Diane is still there, listening.